Hello, everybody. This is the Gazette's Iowa basketball podcast, for lack of a better word. Here we are on the cusp of the most interesting week of the season for the Hawkeyes. Nathan, any argument there?
No argument for me. I think at the beginning of the year, we might have looked at that being the Gonzaga game, and obviously this wasn't scheduled right away. The Big Ten made some adjustments, but all of a sudden now it's two top four games, and probably the most interesting or the toughest week rankings wise for about any team in the country.
Well, just set the stage. We're recording this on Wednesday. The Hawkeyes are ranked 9th. They're at number 3 Michigan Thursday night. And then they go to Ohio State, which is number 4, and they play them Sunday afternoon. And it's the first time that Iowa's played back-to-back top 5 teams in 8 years. And it's not the kind of thing you'd recommend unless you're doing it deep in the NCAA tournament.
2 road games, especially. I mean, it's one thing if you're playing at least one of them at home, but and obviously the road's a little bit different this year with no crowds. But yeah, 2 road games in 4 days against 2 top 4 teams. That's as tough as it gets.
Yeah. On the other hand, if you split, I don't think anybody has a bad word to say about you. Although, of course, if the split means you win the second game, the feelings are warmer. But if you can come back home with 1-1, I mean, I know Iowa players wouldn't say they'd take it, but deep down, maybe.
I think it's a good thing that the Michigan game is first, because if you do split and the win happens to come against Michigan, that's a signature win, the signature win that you hang your hat on, because Michigan's being talked about right now as a consensus top 3 team, getting closer to the ranks of Gonzaga and Baylor. And then if the win happens to come against Ohio State, you're right. You take that sort of, you're feeling good about yourself heading into the last week of the regular season. You say, oh, Michigan, that's a top 3 national championship contender that we couldn't beat on the road. So what? But if you win one of those games, no matter what, I think you're feeling pretty good about yourself, even as you said, Iowa players are obviously going to want a sweep.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can't really even think about Ohio State until Friday, because Michigan is all consuming. What a season they've had. I mean, my gosh, they're 11-1 in the Big Ten, 16-1 overall. They've looked like an 11-1 team to me. There's no fluke here. Obviously, there's no fluke if you're 11-1, but there, I mean, you watch them once and you say, okay, I get that. Have you seen much of them?
Yeah, I've watched them quite a few times. I think the Ohio State game is the one where I really tried to lock in and watch, all 40 minutes. Otherwise, it's like most Big Ten teams where I just kind of see them here and there when I can. But and I did happen to not watch their game at Minnesota. So basically, every time I've seen them play this year, it's hard to point out too many flaws. I mean, it looks like a team that's capable and is currently running away with the Big Ten title, which is not obviously something we expected coming into the season.
They were picked 7th in the conference in the preseason, and they talk about that. But it was a reasonable projection, wasn't it? I mean, you couldn't know that Hunter Dickinson was going to immediately become the force he's become. And they quietly picked up a couple grad transfers that I think that around the country, maybe nobody paid great attention to, but these guys are integral parts of their rotation.
Yeah, it's a team that has a similar profile as the one that did last year. They have similar strengths and weaknesses. It's just that they're a lot better at their strengths this year. And even Michigan, I don't think thought Dickinson was going to come in and make the impact that he did. He didn't start until their 6th game, which was their Big Ten opener. And he was a 4-star recruit. So obviously people knew that he was going to be good, but he's ranked number 43 in the country. It's not like he was one of these guys that comes into Duke, Kentucky, Kansas, Michigan State that gets talked about like, this is an NBA player. You've got to tune in to watch him. He's going to make an impact right away as a freshman. I mean, he just kind of quietly came in and started to quickly become the guy that Michigan runs basically a lot of its team through. And then, the grad transfers. I mean, Mike Smith scored a ton of points at Columbia. I think he was the nation's leading scorer, maybe, or like close to it.
He was the Ivy League's leading scorer. I think he averaged about 22 a game, so he was right up there.
Yeah, he was up there. And,
he's a leading assist guy for them.
Right. He's a short guy. And, I don't think people expected him to they look at him and say, oh, he's a scorer, but he's small and he did that in the Ivy League. He's probably not going to be a scorer for Michigan and really give them a lot, but he's really changed his game and adapted his game to what Michigan has needed as sort of that Xavier Simpson replacement. And he's flourished. And then, Brown has been fantastic too, coming from Wake Forest. Seems like just a couple of guys that are mature, have played a lot of college basketball, and at this stage in their careers just wanted to win and were going to do anything they could to do that. And I think they're averaging like 14.5 points combined. So that's been really key for Michigan too.
And what you just touched on is such a key. Those guys are fifth-year players, 21, 22 years old, and they join Isaiah Livers, Eli Brooks. Those two guys have been around the block in the Big Ten. Franz Wagner plays like an upperclassman. You got a lot of college basketball experience in that roster on top of the freshman Dickinson. And these guys just know how to play. I mean, Livers and Brooks, I always got to be as sick of seeing them as they are of seeing Garza and Bohannon. Eli Brooks averaged 19 points a game against the Hawkeyes last year. This is maybe their least touted starter, but he just knows how to play.
And he played really well against Ohio State on Sunday too. He was outstanding, getting to the basket, shooting threes. And you're right. I mean, these guys are experienced players that know how to win and have been in a winning program. I mean, Juwan Howard last year took over, and I think people had pretty low expectations for him just because he's never been a head coach and he came from the NBA ranks. And we've seen that fail at a lot of places, like St. John's. Vanderbilt's not working out too well right now. But he really came in and took what John Beilein had created there and just put his own spin on it. And they've turned into the same Michigan winning program that's capable of going to the Final Four that Beilein left it in.
Well, defense is a big part of their deal. And I know if you just saw Michigan, Ohio State, nothing else, you'd say, really? Because that was offensive efficiency almost to the max for both teams. But Michigan's defense throughout the season has been consistently good. I think they've allowed under 40% shooting in the Big Ten. They're in the top 10 in the country in adjusted defense. Iowa, the team that's gotten ripped for its defense, their numbers have gotten a lot better in the last 4 games. And I'll grant you they haven't been playing against Michigan, but they played 4 Big Ten teams and defended all 4 pretty well, I thought.
Yeah, it's hard to say what to make of that. I would say that I don't think the defense is as bad as it showed in that stretch before where they had lost 3 out of 4. I don't think it's as good as they've shown in these last 4 games, but I think they're right around where right now overall they're ranked about where I think they are. They're definitely not a good defense. They are hoping to be, I think, a mediocre defense, and that's going to be good enough with the offense they have to win. But it's hard to say. I don't want people to expect them to be able to show that same defense against Michigan, because that's an elite offense, and the teams that they played over the last 4 games, I think were ranked like 7th. Penn State was 7th, Rutgers 8th, Wisconsin 10, Michigan State 12, and conference only adjusted offense. So they're not terrible, but it's also not by no means elite offenses. And I think Iowa is capable of beating Michigan. I just don't think it's going to be with lockdown defense. They just have to be decent on that end of the floor.
Well, and then there's always that question that when you play teams with the great guards, Iowa is up against it. Michigan's got really good guards. Ohio State's got really good guards. So to me, this week is a reality check. Where are you defensively when it's time to go against the best? Do you think that they can squeeze enough defense in either game to do this? Now they're playing against a really good defense Thursday. Ohio State's defense, not so great.
They've got to rebound like they did, and they've been doing the last few games, especially on the defensive side. I think the Michigan State and Penn State games were two of their four best defensive rebounding performances on the season. So that's a big key. And then they just can't have those lapses like we saw in the first game against Ohio State, where they had a double-digit lead, and Ohio State's going to score points. Like I'm expecting high-scoring games in both of these games, but they just cannot go a few minutes where Arns, the best shooter on Ohio State's team, gets 3-4 wide-open looks. I mean, as long as they don't allow that to happen and these sort of 10-0, 12-2 runs from the other team, they can beat either of these teams. That's a tall ask because both Michigan and Ohio State are capable of explosive displays like we saw on Sunday. But I think that's going to be huge, especially coming down the stretch. You've just got to stay within striking distance against both these teams and allow your offense to be in position to win.
I'm really curious how Garza is going to do against Dickinson and against the Michigan defense. Last year, he torched them. I mean, he had 44 points at Michigan. They still lost the game, but they basically said, go ahead, Garza. We're going to cover everybody else. They got away with it. They scored 103 points themselves in that game. They came to Iowa City. Garza gets 33, and Iowa wins the game. That was against John Teske. John Teske is 7'1", just like Dickinson. Teske's playing in the G League right now. He wasn't a bad college player, but Garza owned him. I'm really curious how he's going to do against this Dickinson.
I am too, because I think Teske was a fine player, but he can't move like Dickinson can move. I mean, Dickinson is not only big, but he's quick on his feet and pretty athletic. And I think we're going to see a similar defensive game plan for Michigan this year, where they're just going to hope that, Dickinson can hold his own against Garza and Michigan can shut down the rest of Iowa's guys. I think, last year in the loss, Frederick and Wieskamp had 13 combined points, and in Iowa's win, they had 41. And so, right, Michigan scored 103 points the first time. Like if that happens, Iowa's probably going to lose. Mm-hmm. But I think in terms of your offensive game plan, I think that's really where the key is for me. As fun as that Garza-Dickinson matchup is going to be to watch. And on another note, I hope that foul trouble doesn't play an issue. That this is probably the one game where I wouldn't want the foul out rule, because I just want to see those guys go head to head on every possession. But I think Frederick, coming off that game that he had against Penn State, was kind of a little bit of an underrated storyline. I'm certainly not expecting him to be able to be back to 100% every game this week just because he had a nice game against Penn State. He's clearly probably still dealing with some injury problems, but I think that's another big key coming into this one.
Here's something about Frederick, and I haven't made maybe a big enough deal about this. I did write about it a couple of weeks ago. He has not committed a turnover in Big Ten play. He's played in 12 of the 16 games, 0 turnovers, and he's only made 4 all season. His last one was against Gonzaga before Christmas. That's insane. I mean, even the best ball handlers have turnovers. And now I realize he doesn't have the ball in his hands a lot compared to, say, a point guard. But you're out there. You're playing 20, 25, 30 minutes, and you're not turning the ball over ever. tell me that doesn't make an enormous difference.
It's huge. I mean, when people look at Iowa as having the top offense in the country, I mean, obviously part of that is you have an incredible scorer in Luka Garza, the best in the country. You have excellent shooters all around him. But a huge part of the offensive efficiency is getting enough shots up in the first place. And if you're not turning the ball over, you're getting shots up. And if you've got a guard that is not only a capable three-point shooter, but takes care of the ball, makes good entry passes to the best scorer in the country, that is just such a huge component of what Iowa is doing. And it is incredible. I mean, to have that streak is almost more impressive than like some of these free throw streaks we've been seeing from the team the last couple of years. I mean, to not turn the ball over, and he only uses like 13% of Iowa's possessions. So he's probably not going to turn it over a lot anyway. But to have zero is just, you would think at some point he would just lose the ball off his foot or give a charge or something. But he's just so sure-handed. He doesn't. But it's just incredible.
There are so many ways to turn the ball over.
Yeah.
An offensive foul, even sometimes it's not your fault.
Right.
I'm a big Juwan Howard fan. I always have been. I liked him when he played at Michigan. He was like a steadying influence and a really talented player on the Fab Five. He had a super long NBA career. A player who gained respect the longer he played. Michael Jordan raved about him as a player. And then he sits on the bench with the Miami Heat for 4 or 5 years as an assistant coach. Bayline leaves for the NBA. And voila, Juwan Howard's Michigan's coach. And it was kind of there were a lot of Michigan people who wanted it, but there were a lot of others who said, are we sure about this? And last year they got off to a great start, but then they tailed off. They were 10-10 in the Big Ten. This year, there's been no tailing off. And the things I read and hear from Michigan players talking about Howard is they say he's a terrific coach. And, of course, what players aren't going to come out and say, we're winning despite this guy. But they specifically say, and Hunter Dickinson has said this, but others too, about how much he makes them better players through teaching. And another thing is he brought aboard Phil Martelli, who got fired after a long career coaching in Philadelphia, St. Joseph's, I believe. Martelli's like this bench guy. Howard was secure enough to say, I'm bringing in a guy who's been a head coach forever. And there are a lot of head coaches who aren't secure enough to do that. Howard said, love to have this guy there. And I guess he's been directly responsible for a lot of things too. Is this a dynasty in the making? Because they put out the McDonald's All-America rosters yesterday. They're not going to have an actual game for the second straight year because of the pandemic, but they named the teams, 24 players. Michigan is the only team in the country that's got 3 of them signed. They have the #1 recruiting class in the country right now. This isn't a good thing for the rest of the Big Ten. And so, I mean, guys want to come to Ann Arbor and play for this guy. I think we're looking at the next Big Ten powerhouse.
Michigan is a basketball school right now. I mean, I don't know what fans, think about that, but the evidence is clear. And I think when Beilein was there, maybe we didn't really talk about the dynasty type thing, but they went to a couple Final Fours, and they were clearly in the upper echelon of the Big Ten, which they weren't when he took over. I think right around when him and Fran both came in, both of those programs were in the bottom half of the Big Ten. But now, I think when Beilein left and Juwan Howard was hired, there was some skepticism because, like you said, what we've seen from a lot of these coaches that come in from the NBA that don't have much head coaching experience is that they kind of rely on their brand names a little bit and are hoping to just kind of get the best recruits. And I'm not saying they're necessarily bad coaches, but at a lot of places it hasn't really worked out. But what we saw from Juwan Howard's first press conference at Michigan is that he cares about that place. He was in tears about how much Michigan means to him. And I know sort of winning the press conference is pretty overrated, doesn't really mean a lot, but that was a sign right there. And then hiring Martelli, showing that he's not afraid to bring in a guy with more experience than him. He wants to win at Michigan, and it's not necessarily because he wants to be the star. It's because he cares about that place and he wants it to be like when he was playing there. And yeah, they have the top ranked recruiting class coming in. They have clearly shown to be a Final Four, if not national championship contender this year. I'm not going to make any proclamations about Michigan State because they have some elite talent coming in down the road too. And this is just one off year for them. But it wouldn't surprise me in a few years if we're talking about Michigan being the program in the Big Ten.
Gonna switch courses here. Coming into this podcast, I thought an interesting topic would be, can you make a case for Ayo Dosumnu of Illinois as the player of the year? And I know that will rankle the Hawkeye fans listening to this. I thought you could make a pretty good case for it. Last night, they go to Michigan State and get beat. He goes 6 of 18. And I'm not saying that, cemented Garza getting it, because I think Garza's going to get it all along. But it's pretty hard. If the season had started with nobody knowing who Garza or Dosumnu were, would Dosumnu be the favorite?
I think potentially. What I would say is that the reason I see him kind of getting more into the conversation, and yes, he deserves to be right, second or third place in this vote all along. But I think a big reason why he's in this conversation is that Illinois had won 7 straight games, and we're getting into the time where college basketball is becoming a much bigger part of the national sports conversation. So you see a team like Illinois that had high expectations coming into the season, has won 7 straight games, keeps climbing in the national rankings. They were up to number 5 the last couple of weeks. And you look at the guy that has contributed most to that winning has been Dosumnu. And like I said last week, a lot of that is because he's made some of those Heisman moments, so to say. He's won them games down the stretch when they've needed him. If we didn't know about any of these guys coming into the season, I still think Garza would be the favorite just because of the sheer numbers he's putting up. I mean, I think that you can say what you want about Ken Pom National Player of the Year standings, but to me, that's a pretty bias-free metric, and Garza is clearly number 1 in that, and Dosumnu is actually number 3 behind Drew Timme right now. The funny thing about the Michigan State game is that it was not a good performance for Dosumnu, but Garza had 8 points at Michigan State. The difference obviously is that Iowa won by 30. So that obviously is a difference. I just think it's kind of funny, but I think Garza would be the guy. I mean, you look at the counting stats are pretty close right now. The advanced metrics, I think Garza has a slight edge in that a better offensive rating. He uses more possessions than Dosumnu does, and Iowa does have a number 2 guy in Wieskamp like Dosumnu has in Coburn. But I think Garza is just such a versatile player. And yes, he obviously does a lot of work in the post, but he's also a good 3-point shooter. He has better 3-point shooting stats than Ayo does right now. And clearly Ayo is going to shoot more because he has the ball in his hands and creates offense like that more. But I think when you just look at the whole picture, I think Garza would still have it.
Well, it tells you what kind of season it is when a guard is 3rd in the league in scoring, 2nd in the league in assists, and he's not going to be the league's player of the year. I'll offer this. What if Iowa this week goes to Michigan and Ohio State, doesn't look good, Garza doesn't do anything special. Suddenly Iowa drops down in the standings, and 2 high-profile games, they don't get the job done. Does anything change?
I mean, it's totally fair to wonder. And I know you wouldn't either certainly predict Garza to not play very well in those games, but it's possible. I think it's hard for me to see Iowa falling too badly in the national rankings because they're playing teams that are ranked higher than them on the road. But if they did if people looked at those games and said Iowa is not a national championship, not even a Final Four contender based on how they play in these 2 games, if they kind of fall into closer to the middle of the Big Ten than the top, then possibly people start to think about Dosumnu a little bit more. But yeah, I think Garza would have to play poorly in both of those games, not just Iowa losing.
Here's something that I hate. Fans of both players, both teams, looking for negatives to find about the other one. These are 2 great players, 2 great college basketball players doing tremendous things. Dosumnu gets a triple-double at Minnesota, and I hear Iowa fans saying, yeah, they left him in a blowout. Garza does few things Big Ten players have done in decades, and it's always, what about he can't defend, which isn't true, by the way. I mean, he's not a defensive player of the year, but he's not a stiff either. Why can't you just say these are 2 great players, we like our guy better? Well, I mean, why is everything in this life now, it seems like, not only just we're right, but you suck, you know? I mean, can't you have a little respect for the other guy? Or is that just a sports thing?
I don't know. I think it's the nature of sports now. I mean, it would be nice if this argument, because the argument's going to happen either way. Both fan bases ultimately just want to see their guy get the top award, and it happens. It's happening a little bit on the women's side too, with people arguing that Caitlin Clark should be freshman in the year over Paige Beckers, and you have UConn and national people saying, well, she plays for the best team in the country and Clark's team isn't that good. And you have Iowa people saying, well, yeah, Clark has the ball way more and Beckers can rely on her teammates more because she plays for the best program in the country. Mm-hmm. It's turned into, it's just not going to be one of those things where for some reason people don't argue for their players more for what they're doing. They have to find the flaws in other guys too, and it happens in the national debates too. I mean, I know it's kind of cliche at this point, but to look at people arguing MJ versus LeBron, it's never about, well, I mean, part of it is, but it's not as much about how amazing both those guys are. It's always right. People pointing out the flaws. Well, MJ played in the 90s and LeBron is soft. I mean, it's just the nature of it. It's not fun, but I don't think it's going to change.
The Big Ten situation. Now it looks like unless Michigan decides it's, going to yank 5 kids off the intramural teams and go the rest of the way with them, Michigan, I think, is going to win this conference. But everything else is kind of in flux. I mean, I can see Iowa with a great week getting into a second-place tie, and I can see Purdue passing the Hawkeyes if certain things play out. The scenarios are multiple, but looking at the schedules is why I say this. Purdue's at 10-6 and in 5th place. But I think if I've got this right, they're going to play a 19-game schedule. And they're at Penn State tonight, at home against Wisconsin and Indiana. To me, those are all winnable games, and there's not a gimme in the bunch. We know what Iowa's got. Besides these two road games, they've still got Nebraska and Wisconsin at home. They're going to beat Nebraska, but you can't overlook Wisconsin. I don't care what you saw in Madison last week. Okay. Then there's Ohio State and Illinois, which are above Iowa right now. And Illinois, all right, Illinois's got Nebraska at home, but it closes the season. See if I've got this right. I don't know in which order, but Wisconsin, Michigan, and Ohio State. Illinois,
I think that's the right order.
They go to all three for their last three games. And Ohio State, needs to beat Iowa to be confident of finishing ahead of the Hawkeyes. I think Iowa's going to be a top 4 team, but nothing is set in stone right now, in my opinion.
And Ohio State has to go to Michigan State on Thursday, which is suddenly on the rise. Illinois just got handled there. So there is nothing set in stone. I think the Bart Torvik's website, which is another good college basketball analytics site, had Iowa's 80% to finish in the top 4, which part of me was a little surprised to see it that high based on Iowa playing Michigan and Ohio State. And like you said, Wisconsin's far from a gimme. But yeah, all these other teams have tough games too. Nobody's really playing Nebraska, Northwest. It's not like they have 3 straight games against Penn State, Northwestern, Nebraska, Minnesota, or anything like that. So I could see either of these teams slipping, either of these teams jumping into that clear second place. Somebody's going to have to. And you're right. Everything is there to play for except for the conference championship, in my opinion.
When it comes to tiebreakers, I know Iowa wouldn't have it with Illinois. If it beats Ohio State, they've split against each other. And then it gets kind of murky to me. Maybe
Yeah, then I think they go to the record versus the team highest in the standings and then on down. So a win versus Michigan would give Iowa a tiebreak in that case if they split with Ohio State. But maybe we're not even talking about needing to tie if they win that game. Mm-hmm. But then I think so. Iowa would be hurt in a situation if like Indiana jumped up, but Ohio State's 0-2 against Purdue, so that's helpful. If Purdue is right there, then and it gets to that point, then I think Iowa's win over Purdue could make a difference there.
Well, let's get out of this numbers swamp.
A lot's going to change in a week.
Yeah, I know, and it starts tomorrow night in Ann Arbor, and so you've been nailing these games pretty well the last couple weeks. How do you think Iowa does on this trip? And it's 2 trips, by the way. They're going to go back and forth and back and forth.
I think Iowa is going to split. I think they're going to. I think they're going to split, but I couldn't tell you. I'm confident about like either game or like making certain predictions. It's just a gut feeling that I think they beat Michigan and lose to Ohio State. That's probably not a prediction many people are willing to make. It's just a kind of a feeling that I have. Michigan, their one loss came to Minnesota on the road, and that was a few days after they blew out Wisconsin and what was then viewed as like their marquee game of the season because Wisconsin was still a top 10 team at that point. I think that sort of like letdown thing is talked up more than it actually matters. But I'm just going to play the trend and say Michigan, gets a little let down and falls to an Iowa team that's hot and confident coming into this one. And then for the Ohio State game, I'll just say it's a bad matchup for Iowa. It's 2 elite offenses, and I'll just give Ohio State the nod to outscore them in that one.
Michigan's got to hit a little patch of ice at some point, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, we were talking about this when we were talking about the strengths of the conferences and how we didn't want to think Gonzaga or Baylor would go undefeated in the Big Ten. You would think Michigan would not finish with 1 loss either.
Yeah. I mean, if before the season you said that any team had even a semi-decent chance of going 19-1, well, Michigan won't because it doesn't play 20 games, but 1 loss, it's like, no, that's not going to happen. I mean, Michigan against Ohio State. Ohio State doesn't have the great center to contend with Dickinson, and it showed. Dickinson had his way with them in the second half, was dominant, the player of the game. I don't see him doing that against Iowa. I certainly see him competing and matching up, but I don't see Hunter Dickinson as being the force in who wins or loses this game.
Yeah, he's had some off games, but I think it is notable in that Minnesota game. He had 9 points, 5 rebounds, 5 turnovers, and Robbins was the player of the game for Minnesota. He had 22 points, 8 rebounds. So that's another one of those little trends where I'm thinking maybe if Dickinson struggles a little bit and Garza really puts it to him, and Iowa's guards obviously play well, then that's a recipe for winning against Michigan.
Well, we'll have a lot to talk about again next week. I am going to live on the road. Michigan and Ohio in winter. This is the life. Especially during the pandemic.
It's not as cold as last week, though, at least, right?
No, I can at least go for walks with a mask on.
Are you one of those people that has certain restaurants on your list and Big Ten?
No. I mean, look, I've been the master of finding out what the best local pizzeria is that delivers to hotels.
Nice.
I'm a very cautious man when it comes to the pandemic, and knock on wood, I haven't even caught a cold this winter. So that's a streak I wouldn't mind continuing.
Well, I had a nasty sore throat the last few days, and I'm just on the mend today. So hopefully that bad luck stays away from you.
Well, good luck to you with that. Good luck to everybody out there with their own health. And thank you for watching, for listening. And we will see you again soon.